Hello, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the first installment of what we're going to call the Vigilant Christian Post. My name's Rich McGillen, and we're going to sit together here and learn a little something extra that I've been trying to put together so I could understand it. And now I'm going to hand it off to the rest of you fellas and see what you guys can make of it. This is where my spirit drove me to go with this whole lesson plan. So start here literally at the beginning. The Age of Titans and the Ark Builders. A men's prophecy study on the days of Noah, the end times, and the choice before every man. As it was in the days of Noah, so will it be in the coming of the Son of Man. Matthew 24:37. The purpose of this study is that Jesus deliberately tied the last days to the days of Noah. That means Genesis 6 is not a myth, trivia, or fringe. It is actually prophetic context. This study is meant to help men understand what truly characterized Noah's generation, recognize the reoccurring biblical pattern of men of renown, discern how greatness can become a form of deception, and choose faithfulness over recognition in the last days. This is not about fear, fellas. It is about discernment and alignment. So the scriptures we're going to look at today, if you want to screenshot this real quick, you have Genesis 6, 1 through 4, Genesis 6, 8 through 13, Hebrews 11, 7, Matthew 24, 37 through 39, Luke 17, 26 and 27, Philippians 2, 6 through 8, and Luke 18, 8. So go ahead and make sure you go back and check those if you'd like. We will mention some of these in the plan here. That's all right. So section 1, the days of Noah, more than general sin. Genesis does not describe Noah's time as merely immortal. It described it as corrupted. The earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. Genesis 6:11. The Hebrew idea of corruption implies distortion, something no longer functioning as designed. So Genesis 6:4 gives us the defining feature. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. So what that scripture emphasizes is might, renown, and legacy. The Bible is not impressed with these traits, but it records them because they explain why society followed these men instead of God, these mighty, renowned men of legend. Into section 2, Nephilim, giants, and men of renown, a necessary distinction. As the title implies, there has to be a distinction between what the giants were and what the men of renown were, and how they were all still considered Nephilim. The Bible never states that all Nephilim, though, were giants. Later passages confirm that some descendants grew to great size, but Genesis 6 itself implies status and power, not just height. So, likely categories, some were physically large and terrifying looking, obviously, monstrous. Many were likely normal in appearance, but stronger, smarter, more dominant, more charismatic. And the one I want you to really focus on is more influential. So the key principle, not all Nephilim were giants, but all represented unnatural power or influence. This explains why they became leaders. They shaped culture, and they were remembered as heroes, possibly and likely doing heroic things that others, regular quote-unquote humans, could do. Section 3, why the world did not panic. And this is a really important part, and I really, anyone that's listening, I want you to get this fact out of this. If you don't get anything else, is we're not just talking about monsters and giants. There are real, normal-looking folks here that were just renowned, influential, strong in presence, whatever. There was something about them that made them stand out, and it wasn't just some giant stature. But there were giants, but they weren't all giants. So we're going to go into section 3 under that idea. Why didn't the world panic? Jesus gives us a crucial insight. They were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage. And then the waters came, or then the flood came. I think that's how that one finishes. Like I said, that's what I gave you the scriptures earlier. You're going to want to read, I think it's Matthew 24, 37 through 39. So read that whole thing for the full context of what's being said there, but it's basically to imply that it came in a flash, that folks weren't paying attention, being merry, eating and drinking, and boom, here comes the flood, because they weren't paying attention in multiple ways, and they were paying attention to the wrong things. But obviously life felt normal. So how does life feel normal if you're surrounded by giants and monsters and having to run around, escape being eaten by some giant Nephilim? And that's why these bullet points are good points. This is important. If evil were obvious, that deception would have failed. So if it was obviously monsters and giants trying to convince people to be some kind of way, either through just intimidation, I don't know if it would have took, but through coercion and alienation and shaming and things of people that look like them, and especially if they were considered leaders and influential, you can even see how that works today. You know, the influencers and people of, there's lots of men and women of renown in this world today. And I believe that's the main thing that should be focused on, and why Jesus said that in the last days it will be like as the days of Noah were. So we're not seeing a bunch of giants and monsters, and I don't think, yes, that point was made, but it wasn't the focus. It was the men of renown and the corruption of the earth, how those are related. So that's why the world didn't panic. It was corrupt humans running around doing corrupt stuff, being self-involved, believing they were doing it, and totally ignoring God. And like I said, if it were obvious, deception would have failed. So if monsters were everywhere, people would have resisted. Instead, society functioned, thrived, and admired its leaders. The danger was not fear, the danger was admiration. People followed impressive men instead of a righteous God. Let me say that again. In the days of Noah, people would rather have followed impressive men instead of a righteous God. That's the inversion. That's the problem. Looking away. Back then, everyone was, the whole earth. Literally like Noah was left. Section 4. And also afterward, the pattern continues. Genesis 6:4 includes a phrase many overlook, and it's a simple 3 words, and also afterward, or after that. This signals continuation, reoccurrence, and an echo. The Bible is telling us this pattern resurfaces when the conditions allow it to. Jesus confirms this directly. So will it be in the coming of the Son of Man. It will be like the days of Noah. The end times is not going to require literal giants or monsters, just great, quote-unquote, great men. Men who believe themselves to be great and the rest of the world to be great. Now you're following me here. So chapter 5, Titans and the Ark Builders, the central allegory of this entire lesson plan. So every age, all throughout history, has produced titans, men of strength, men of intellect, men of authority, men others naturally follow. There's lots all throughout history. We could name them one after another, especially in our fantastic history books. It's nothing but names and men of renown doing miraculous, incredible things, leading armies, blah, 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 right? So that's what our entire scholastic history is taught, is that we know who these men are, what their names were when they were born, when they died, and what great things they did. Men of renown. Not giants, right? In a physical sense, but they were gigantic in the sense of the view. Like people were mostly basic and humble and hill folk, you know, especially if you even want to talk about early American times. You know, that was the lifting up of these men of renown, like George Washington or Thomas Jefferson. All these names we're supposed to memorize. So those are the giants of those times, the titans of those times. But also, every age also produces ark builders, men of obedience, men of faith, men willing to be mocked, and men even unseen altogether by the world. Now look that we consider them ark builders. And there's a reason that we're going to do that here, because there's a direct contrast between what we would consider titans or men of renown and ark builders like Noah and later on our beloved Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. So the contrast in Noah's day was the titans or the men of renown were all celebrated. They were all very influential. Everyone followed them. They were admired and remembered by culture and the world, venerated by the world, put on TV, shown to you all the time. Everybody shared their stuff, talked about their stuff. They didn't have TVs, but maybe shared in tablets, talked about on stages, and maybe even play acted their stories in plays or something, right? Or even in music, songs. But they were the influence they had back then was different, maybe, than we had now. Word traveled in a different way, but word still traveled nonetheless, and habits still formed. And so the ark builders, like Noah, represented basically the direct opposite. Rather than being celebrated, like Noah, ark builders were ridiculed. Why would you be ridiculed if you're an ark builder? Because you're not going with the flow, right? You're standing there and building something totally different, usually in opposition to what already exists as an alternative, which is this ark. So you will be ridiculed. There are quotes all through history that say that more or less. You're going to be laughed at first when you try to do a new thing. And that is mankind. That is especially when mankind is focused on and think they know what they're doing and think they've got it figured out and it's all about them and their names and their men of renown. Then they're going to celebrate themselves, but they will not celebrate the new guys. Just like today, when new history is brought to the table and it's brought in front of the men of renown, it's mocked, as the men of renown can say it's whatever, because they're influential and they're followed, admired, and venerated by the culture. Naysayers are not. So naysayer then is not going to be able to rely on the veneration of people, but must rely on his faith in his God. So much faith that willing to take ridicule. Even if you may have already been famous and you had an awakening like so many are having now today. In today's times, you see all these people of renown. And now they want to come to Jesus, and what's the first thing that happens? But they get ridiculed by the entire world, the culture that has been created by these names of renown. So the difference between an ark builder and a titan is that a titan, the men of renown, do whatever it is they can to be followed, and they believe in their own strength. So their focus is being followed, whereas an ark builder like Noah, his focus is in following God and being obedient to God. Again, another contrast. Ark builders are going to endure being separate from the world and the culture, and separate from being admired and not receiving those applauses and those, in today's world, those likes, follows, and shares. Enduring not getting that as an ark builder, doing something new, not waiting for the world to acknowledge what you're doing and admire you for it, but letting just your obedience to God be enough, and the promise of the reward in the future in heaven when you followed it and done the good thing and done the right thing by your Father. And then being, like I said, remembered by God. An ark builder will be remembered by God and likely forgotten by the world as it is destroyed. The world rewarded the titans. God preserved the ark builder. All right, here we are on to section 6. Was Noah himself a man of renown? This is one I kind of wanted to throw in here toward the end as I kept thinking about it. There's a lot of reason to think he at least was a man of renown and not necessarily offspring of of procreation between angels and human women. That there's a distinction there, and you may have been able to be considered a titan, a Nephilim, a fallen one, fallen in nature, and still be a regular human, or maybe even like not even a regular human, the first pure seed human. So here we'll go. We'll talk about that. So in 6 we get, was Noah himself a man of renown? This question matters. Genesis 6:9 does say Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generations. The phrase "in his generation" implies comparison, so that Noah stood out. He was blameless in his generation. That's singling him out. He lived 950 years, fathered nations, and interacted with the same society that celebrated the mighty men. It is entirely possible, perhaps even likely, that Noah could have been influential, respected, or even renowned. But he made a different choice. And this is even the deeper allegory, and this is the purpose of looking at it and breaking it down verse by verse, so you really understand what we're looking at. That something was special about Noah. The seed was not corrupted, obviously. Something about his seed allowed him to live 950 years amongst men who lived, and were told, said by God, to be able to live 120 years. That Noah is talked about in other historical contexts with different names, which proves he may have been influential and famous across cultural boundaries, even into the future. So he was a man of renown and chose to turn away from that in the midst of it and obey God and build the ark and be ridiculed. So it's I think, important to make that distinction. He wasn't just a regular guy. So this guy that was headed in literally had every reason to not do it, to think himself a great person, chose to humble himself and obey. So he did make a different choice. Noah's distinction: he did not leverage influence for his influence for power. He did not seek admiration. He accepted mockery instead of applause, and he obeyed God publicly for decades. By faith, Noah condemned the world. Hebrews 11:7. Not by preaching alone, but by obedience. Noah chose faithfulness over fame. Faithfulness over fame. Section 7, Christ, the greater Noah. Jesus completes the picture. Though he was in the form of God, he humbled himself even, in Philippians 2:6-8. Where the men of renown took glory, Christ laid it down. Where the Titans dominated, Christ submitted. Where Noah built an ark of wood, Christ became the ark of salvation himself. So, section 8, end times, application for men. Jesus' warning is not, watch out for giants. It is, do not be deceived. The last days will test men with opportunity, recognition, influence, and power. The question is not, can you be great? The question is, will you be faithful when greatness is available? That's that question. Will you still remain faithful when greatness is available? My personal reflections for you. So take some time with these questions as you come to the end of this video. So, where am I tempted to pursue recognition over righteousness? I think that's a huge one right now, today. The reason I wanted to bring this lesson forward was for these kinds of questions is, where are we being tempted in that way to pursue recognition? And when we are given the opportunity at recognition, is there a sacrifice being made of our righteousness? Of course, there is. Because if we start to focus on the rewards the world wants to give us in recognition, we're not giving it to God. We're not giving it, it's not us. You get it? It's not us. Us giving it to him here so we can get it from him later is the point. In what area is God calling me to quietly build an ark? And what is an ark? We could define a safe space for a message to be preserved, or something to be preserved in stormy, unsure times, right? So what are you building? What special thing are you building? Is it physical? Is it spiritual? What are you building that will preserve hard times? Are you building a relationship, an ark for your heart and you and God to be in together? Like, are you building something to preserve that for future generations even? Because that is our job as parents, is to build these lessons into our children, and then they will even take them further, the same way through the same process, learning how it applies to their lives as they move forward. And are we willing to be mocked for our obedience to these things? Are you willing to be laughed at because you are literally doing everything different than everyone says you're supposed to do to succeed? Like, are we going to do what the world says to do, or are we going to do what God says to do? So, if Christ returned today, would he find faith or ambition? Would he find you humbly waiting for him because you've been paying attention the whole time? Or will he find you caught up in your ambition? Will you miss him? Will he just fly right by you because you weren't paying attention, right? So, final exhortation. When the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? Luke 18:8. In Noah's story, the world followed greatness. Today, what does the world do? In Noah's day, God saved Noah and his family because of his faithfulness. And their faithfulness, to even as being mocked, ridiculed, made fun of by literally the whole rest of the world, they still built an ark, got on there with the animals, and saved themselves. God saved them. In the last days, today, Titans will rise again. We even have football teams named what? Titans. If you ask somebody on the team who they are, they're going to tell you, I'm a Titan. So it's not giants. It's the idea of something big and important, big as a god, glorious, fame-worthy, legendary, heroic men of renown. Yeah. So there will be men of renown in the last days. That is what today is. You are nothing if you are not an influencer and known, a face on the TV, a face on the phone, a face on the laptop or tablet. There are, what do we call them now? Icons. Face you can never forget, right? These are renowned. They're not giants in any other aspect except they're so big and in our face all the time. It just takes up a lot of brain space and thinking time. It could be spent on something else, like maybe being faithful and reading scriptures. And in that sense, that is how we are going to be tested every single day. Our builders will be tested. And we are trying to preserve our relationship with him, our continual understanding and revelation of our path and destiny with him, through him, in his glory, and just hoping one day to be with him. And that alone should be enough in treasure, but I want, if there's more available than that, I want as many crowns as we can pile up on the stage. It's not hard to look at life that way. So I guess we'll end with saying just be an ark builder. Choose obedience to God over being known and renowned. And choose faith over fame. Faith is greater than fame. Carry your crown. Chosen. I send this plan to you with the power of the Holy Spirit in Jesus Christ's name for our Father in heaven. Blessings to you forever and ever.